Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's so great to be here with you today. You are tuned into the Cosmic Connection. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Amanda Poole Walsh, and I am here with Rick Merlin Levine. And today we are, I asked him to do that, and he did it. So great. Your Einstein pose. Today we are going to be doing a couple things. We're going to continue the conversation from last week, which was all about astrology and homeopathy. So if you want to get caught up on that, just go to last week. It was fascinating, really, really great conversation. So go check that out. But we're going to just kind of wrap that up here today, but then also bring it into some new territory around astrology and healing in general. So before we go in, I just wanted to start with this idea that it's really not quite astrology and homeopathy that we talked about last week. Really what we talked about was a homeopathic approach to practicing astrology.
Really a homeopathic approach to life in general.
Exactly. There's so many different facets that this can apply to. So Rick, let's start there. We're going to go through some examples, kind of bring it to life a little bit more. But if there's anything you want to add from the conversation that we had last week, let's start there.
Well, first of all, I am a product of the 60s. I can't even remember the conversation we had last week. And what was your name again? No, I actually think that the way you introduced this was very important, because you're right. This is not astrology and homeopathy. It's not using astrology to find a homeopathic remedy, although there are qualified health practitioners who, in fact, use a chart to help them determine a remedy. It's not that. It's really understanding that we approach the world, the cosmos, our life, in a way in which we template or we frame our life as we go through it. And we do it in some ways that seem like that's the way it is, but it's really only one way. And so this whole idea of understanding that what we call medicine is really just one approach to medicine, to healing, that what we call medicine is allopathic, treating pathos or suffering or feelings with the opposite, rather than homeopathic, which is treating it with the same and encouraging it. It's really a model that basically says we're used to approaching reality with suppression rather than expression. That's Saturn's job. Saturn's job is to hold it down, to keep it down, to keep the structures in order. And when things get out of order, Saturn's job is to suppress, is to repress, is to constrict, is to restrict, is to push it down and to keep it contained. And homeopathy says, no, that is problematic, and this is the source of perhaps all or most psychological and emotional and physical dis-ease.
If Saturn is the suppression, or in the repression and the constriction, then which planet would you put with homeopathy or the expression?
I wouldn't put any of them particularly with homeopathy, but I would say with expression would be, the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter.
Everybody but Saturn?
Well, Saturn is the limit.
Right.
The sun radiates, the energy goes out. The moon does receive, but it receives to nurture. Mercury is certainly interactive. Venus is magnetic, and it's what we're drawn toward, but maybe Venus doesn't have to be quite as expressive, but it's still expressive. Mars is certainly, about going and about external expressive. And Jupiter is about expanding all of that to what? To Saturn, to the limit. And Saturn is basically I'm the container. I hold it all in. I keep it all in order. And when something gets out of order, I want to contain it and hold it on in. And this is what the surprise of the outer planets were. Uranus was, wait a minute, Saturn doesn't hold everything in. And in fact, once we break free from Saturn, there's a whole another amazing world out here, and I'm free from Saturn. Neptune says, I'm very much like Jupiter, but Jupiter's job is to expand right up to the limits of Saturn. So Jupiter always has to keep the laws and the order and the mental rationalizations, the philosophies, the education. Jupiter has to work within those very real limits. Neptune comes along and says, I'm Jupiter, but Saturn's gone. I can go forever. I can extend to the outer boundaries of imagination. There's no limits. And then, of course, Pluto says that, yes, once we're out past Saturn, that finality, the moment of death, that's just the beginning of a deeper transformation. So I would say that Saturn is like the cheese in the song The Farmer in the Dell. Do you remember that song?
Kind of, but I don't remember the role of the cheese.
The cheese stands alone.
Okay. Nice. All right. So if we were going to, again, this idea, when it's applied to astrology, is about looking at the different transits or looking at the quote unquote tough aspects in a chart. And instead of, okay, how do I brace myself, or like, how do I deal with the actual symptoms of something like that a transit like this would bring up? Instead, how do I actually dance with that energy, move with that energy, and actually allow it to transform me and change me and help me grow, etc. So can you give us a few more examples?
Yes, but I would also say it's not just about transits, although that's kind of what we focused on last time.
Okay.
In Carl Jung's psychology of what he called individuation, the process of integrating and assimilating that which is subconscious, that which is just out of reach of our everyday awareness, and bringing that into awareness and then working with those energies. In Jung's modality of individuation or analytical psychology, the goal basically is to express all the find ways to assimilate and express all the nuances of the complications of our archetypes, of our energy patterns and constructs. When I look at a chart from a Jungian standpoint, the question is, what planets are not given a voice? And how, as an astrologer, can I help my client explore the expression of that which is bottled? Remember, in classical astrology, in Vedic astrology too, not just the Western Hellenistic tradition, there's a lot of judgment. And again, there are many modern practitioners who use ancient techniques without that same level of judgment, but there's still, I mean, in astrology, not modern astrology, if you had, let's say, Mars square the moon or Mars square Saturn, you were considered to have an afflicted Mars. That's not my judgment. That's the technical word to describe the planet. It was an affliction. As an affliction, what you tried to do is not fall into the bad patterns. So you'd say, my Mars is terrible. I'm going to bury it. I'm going to suppress it. I'm going to hide it, which then, of course, brings out the affliction, because that which we resist persists. That which we deny, suppress, or unconsciously repress, that's the stuff that pops out as projection, and then it happens in our environment, and we go, why do I keep meeting these bad people, or these people that are bad for me? Or why do I keep bumping into the law? Or why, I mean, fill in the blanks with whatever, you know, our scenarios are. So it's not just about transits. And the question then becomes, your question was, so give me some examples. Well, a simple example, you know, you have, let's just say, let's go back to the Mars, because Mars is considered a malefic or a bad planet to start. And it's really less bad, although the word malefic means ill or bad. Like a malady is the same root as mal. It's not that it's bad, it's that it's more difficult. And so Mars square the moon would be considered bad because it indicated that the assertion macho, regardless of what gender equipment you have to be, regardless of what gender equipment you happen to be wearing this lifetime, Mars is still the macho energy. It's the how we assert, and it's how we aggress, and it's how we make boundaries. And the moon is the receptive, nurturing, caring, protective aspect, the mothering. It's the maternal energy. Again, whether I have a Cancer moon, and those people who know me is that I can seem feisty and argumentative at times, but I'm like, if you're my friend, I'm your mom. It's like I care for you. I really do. And someone important in my life many years ago, when I'd say, I don't care, she'd say, no, that's wrong. You need to change your language. You care. You just don't mind. And I go, that is very true. I care, but I don't mind. All right. So back to the moon square Mars. Oh, and I just realized I have this in my chart, and that wasn't really why I picked it out, but it's certainly in my chart. This can indicate an early childhood or family of origin, the moon, the mom, the home, and Mars being at odds, 90 degrees with it. And so the traditional allopathic remedy for a client who has a natal Mars square moon might be to take a chill pill. Cool your heels. You don't have to take on everyone all the time. Sometimes someone who cares for you, you might feel like they're in your way and you might want to push back. You don't have to do that. But that then takes that Mars and it suppresses it. And in suppressing it, it's going to leak out somewhere. The energy is going to come out at someone, some event, something, or it's going to turn into internal inflammation. Because internal inflammation is simply the doctrine of signatures. The metaphor is that internal inflammation is basically anger or assertion or aggression that is not expressing. So it's going to come out as skin rashes or angry red or joint inflammation or whatever. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's the only cause of those symptoms, but that becomes the complex of energy. And so the question isn't, what do you do to hold that Mars in? The question becomes, how do you find a way to work with that Mars in a healthier manner so that every time you tell someone who loves you what it is you need, you don't leave them the same day? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And we could take any planets and make examples of them, but normally what happens in hard aspects, by hard aspects, I mean conjunction, aspects based upon 90 degrees and multiples and divisions of 90 degrees. What I mean by that is two planets that are 90 degrees apart or square. Another 90 degrees makes it an opposition or 180 degrees. Another 90 degrees makes it a 270 degree. That's another square from the other side. Another 90 degrees brings it all the way around, and that makes it a conjunction. But then there's also the half squares and the square and halves, or is that squares and a half? I don't know. But all of these aspects are conflictive. In traditional, in the allopathic mode, we would say if it's conflictive, eliminate the conflict. In the homeopathic approach, we're saying find a way to take that stress, that annoyance, that irritation, that blockage, and like the Aikido master that we talked about last week, take that energy and turn it into something powerful. You see people who have reached a pinnacle of success, and I don't mean accumulating toys and money. I mean a sense of self-realization, a sense of self-actualization, a sense of usefulness to humanity or the people around them. These people are almost always driven by squares that theoretically are afflictions, because we take those internal things, and if we can work with healing the energy rather than burying it, then it becomes something that is very useful. Even a traditional astrologer who might say that squares are difficult or bad, will usually acknowledge that squares can also be creative. they can be creative because that is indicative of the person who hasn't suppressed or denied or buried part of that square, and instead said, I'm looking at this energy. What can I do that can, if not solve or salve the energy, what can I do to work with it in some way that I can bring it into my dance that becomes part of a healing process rather than a compartmentalization or a denial. Yeah, there were 2 or 3 other things that were in my mind, and I went far enough down that road that I think I've reached a temporary end.
Okay, good.
Did that make sense, though? In
It
other words,
does.
it's not just about a transit.
Right.
It's about approaching everything that way. One of the basic underlying concepts of homeopathy is express, not suppress. And I've said this before. I know we talked about this in the relationship workshop that we did on Astrology Hub that's still available. And that is, we did a deep dive into the difference between suppression and repression. And if someone says, oh yeah, I repress that all the time, no, they're lying. Because if you know you do it, you're not repressing it, you're suppressing it. Repression is absolutely invisible. It's the part of you that when someone comes and says, you know, Amanda, you know that weird thing you do, you're just like your mom. And you go, no, I'm not like, well, maybe, I don't know your relationship with your mom, but it's like, no, I'm nothing like my mama. And then 4 of your friends are standing around and go, yeah, you're exactly like your mom. It's that part of us that's so invisible that even when we're told it, it's like it doesn't register. That's the part, by the way, that when we go into therapy, that's the part that has to come out gradually, because if the therapist says, you know, this thing that you got going on right now with your job or your relationship or your children or whatever, you know, seems to me to be connected with this thing that you just described about, you know, this argument that you had that became so important in your life with your parents that caused them to give you a room downstairs, blah, 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 blah. And you go, no, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with that. Because there's a thing that Freud uncovered that, regardless of whether you are a Freudian or not, is part of all modern psychology, and it's called resistance. And that is when the ego gets to a place where it thinks that something or someone is chipping away at its authority, the ego resists. And part of good therapy is creating an environment where that part of the ego lets down the boundaries so that those things can float up out of the subconscious into dialogue and can be worked on. And this is basically homeopathic. You know, it's still taking that which creates the blockage, the stress, the illness, the dis-ease, and bringing it into awareness. I'm coming full circle now to Jung saying every planet just wants a voice, just wants to be heard. And so when an astrologer looks at a chart, one of the things that we can actually get a clue, you never know until you enter the dialogue with the patient, with the client, but we can look and say, you know, this chart has, let's say, a Jupiter-Mars conjunction opposed Saturn. Now, in an opposition, that is a stress point. And in an opposition, it's like a tug of war. We're in the middle. And so we got Mars and Jupiter pulling this way, optimistically, expressively, athletically, adventurously. Mars is physical, Jupiter is bigger, more. And that's an easy aspect for most people to like. So then we have Saturn pulling the other way, and it's like that's an aspect that the Mars Jupiter doesn't necessarily like. We're caught in the middle of the tug of war. Which way are you going to turn? Well, you're going to turn that way and go, I like you. And as soon as you do that, that becomes invisible. Now, let's say that you have a Cancer sun and a Virgo moon, and Mercury retrograde somewhere, and that your personality really is pulling in and is much more cautious about expression and so on. Well, in that case, you might look at that Mars and the Mars Jupiter conjunction and go, oh my God, that frightens the crap out of me. Saturn is the rule. It's the authority. It's the conservation of energy, both physically and politically. Even it holds that in. It's constrictive, and you go, yes, thank you very much for holding it in, because if you weren't there, I might go off the edge. I might be crazy. I might get on an airplane and go to Thailand and never come back. That would be terrible. Saturn says, no, you have a job, you can't do that, you can't. So I turn and look at Saturn, and then the other side is gone. Now, as an astrologer, part of our job is to look for the planets that may not express easily, and to look also at the planets that may express so easily that they're that the condition would be hyper expression. Let's say someone has Mercury trine Uranus. Now that's a wonderful aspect, unless you can't keep your mouth shut and you say outrageous things all the time and have no friends, because Mercury, the communicator, let's say in Gemini, not that there's anything wrong with Mercury in Gemini, but let's say you have Mercury in Gemini, trine Uranus in, Uranus in, I'm trying to get it in a sign that someone might have it in, Gemini, where can we go? Libra, Uranus in Libra, early 70s. So if you have Mercury in Gemini trine Uranus in Libra, and you have a Leo sun conjunct Mars, well, that then might make that Mercury trine Uranus problematic, because you could be, I'm not saying you are, but you could always be like on stage and over expressing and saying things that are outrageous that may or may not have anything to do with anything. And so there, it's not only about expressing that which is suppressed, it's about creating balance and figuring out how to de-attenuate something that's hyper expressing without suppressing it, because as soon as you start suppressing it, it's going to come out somehow, somewhere.
So basically, anything that we have in the chart can be something that is quote unquote good or bad. The way that we frame anything that we have in the chart and or a transit is everything, really. As you're speaking, it's like the frame that we give it and the lens that we're looking at it through is going to completely color our experience of having those aspects.
So there was a psychologist in, I don't know whether he wrote this book in the late 50s or early 60s, but the psychologist's name was George Kelly. And he wrote a book that was kind of a darling of counseling psychology for a while. I have no idea whether this still is. I'm hearkening back to my academic psychology years in the late 60s, early 70s. And George Kelly wrote a book that was very brilliant, had a huge impact on me. It still does. And I haven't looked at it in 50 years, to be quite honest. I mean, I have it on my shelf, but I know, I retained what it said. And his book was titled A Theory of Personality. And in his theory of personality, everyone has a worldview. It's a hard thing to argue with. Our worldview is very simply the overarching way in which we template our reality. If we were brought up in a fundamental Christian or Muslim or Jewish household, in a very regimented, set of expressions, we template the universe in a particular way. If we were born up in a very permissive household where maybe there was an early childhood divorce and we lived with our mother who worked and we had total freedom and no supervision at all, we might have a very different, worldview, if we had an early on interest in philosophy and read, in other words, what it is that we take as our reality construct, whether you're an atheist or a polytheist, or whether you're, I mean, in every aspect of life, we have what we call worldviews. Now, George Kelly says the worldview is invisibly significant because whenever we hit a new situation, the choices that we have always have to be contained within our worldview. If we believe that Saturn is the outward planet, or if we believe the Earth is flat, we can never make a choice to go around the Earth. If we believe that Saturn is the limiting planet, we can never do anything that will question authority, because Saturn is finality. It is the outward planet, that's it. And so what George Kelly said, that the therapist's job is to help a patient understand their worldview and then help them entertain facts or pieces of experience, or to integrate their own experiences that alter that worldview, that simply give them choices they never had, period. A brilliant concept, so simple, so basic. We go through life with our astrology chart, and if we are a Taurus sun with a Virgo moon, and a bunch of planets in Capricorn and a couple in Cancer, we have a particular worldview that's very different from the worldview of someone who was born in, February, March of 62, who has 73 planets in Aquarius, and maybe the moon in Aries. One person, the two people are going to just approach things very differently. And the beauty of astrology is not to tell someone who they are. It's to acquaint them with who they are not. Because as we begin to understand that my normal template as a Taurus is to simplify things so that I have a direction, so I know how to get to the barn at 6 p.m. for milking, or or to the field for food at when the sun, whatever it is. We have ways of looking at things that, as a Taurus, that we would simplify things so that we can make direction, so that we have solutions to whatever's going on. Whereas a Gemini might not care about the solution; they just want more information so that they can have more options. Now, these are part of our worldview. And as an astrologer, we can use astrology to help a client understand some of the other approaches, so that rather than just automatically responding unconsciously like we do to allopathic medicine and say, oh, I have this, I better take 2 of those. Oh, the symptom's gone, I'm better. And again, I said this last week, I want to be really clear. I'm not against allopathic medicine. It's just another way of templating reality.
And what feels like what's happening with 2020 is that we are all getting an opportunity to expand our worldview, to bring in other perspectives, and to see where our worldview has actually created the reality that we're living in, and how we'd like to shift that worldview to create a different kind of reality.
And I would like to point out that what you just said is true, and B, probably more of a minority than we would like to think, because there's another way of approaching all this overwhelm of opportunity to expand our minds, to look at things differently, to open up, to review. These are retrograde words. Retrograde, if you put an RE in front of every word you can, that's what a retrograde is. So in this retrograde season, we review, reconsider, reconstruct, rethink, reanalyze, revisit, And as we do that, we certainly have the opportunity to alter and recreate. However, someone who is in their ego, someone who has not delved beneath the surface of the appearance of things, sees all these other facts, and what they do is they harden their shell. They go into a deeper denial. They go into, if there's a virus out there, then I might be needing to rethink this about so and so. So there's no virus out there. Or if there's climate change, that might mean I need to change my business practice or my travel practice or whatever. So there's no climate change. I mean, I'm not trying to talk someone into or out of whatever their beliefs are. I'm just saying that often when we deny an entire construct of information, we do it out of the need for the ego, out of fear. And here we come back to the fear versus love. The ego's need for maintaining its dominance, its authority, its Saturnianness. Because when Saturn and Mars and the sun are working together, they're a dangerous trio. Why? Because the sun is radiant energy, and Mars is the energy converted into action, and Saturn is the authority to carry that out. So when you see the Sun King, going to war and taking over the next country because they're afraid if they don't, in a Machiavellian kind of a sense, that the prince, met by Machiavelli in the late 1400s, early 1500s, basically said that if you're a ruler, you always have to have a war machine to make sure that you are preempting someone who could attack you from taking away your stuff. And so, that's, I didn't mean to jump on this, but what you said is very, very true. But it gets back to, and it brings up another whole spectrum of things where we say, oh, this COVID plan, a pandemic, what's going on with the awareness of, the systemic racism. This stuff is so great because it's creating a revolution, an awakening, and an opening. And I go, yeah, it might be for some people. It might be even for a lot of people. That population may be growing and growing and growing, but it's also creating what a psychologist would call reaction formation, which is that there is also an increasing number of people that are closing down and thickening their shell and going further and further into that resistance, denial, suppression, repression mode without even necessarily knowing it. So it's
definitely true. It reminds me of what you said, though. If you spoke to a traditional astrologer about a square and you had your configuration, and that would be normally bad or mal in one interpretation, or it could be creative. That square creates it. So what you're describing of what could be happening for people right now in 2020 and anytime really.
But more so now, but yes, anytime.
Yes, is true. And it's all depending on our worldview, our perspective, our opportunity to see it as an opportunity, or our opportunity to see it as the end of the world. I mean,
I think that the danger of thinking that this is the opportunity and everything is on this moment and everything is going to be great, that worldview is just as dangerous, maybe not just, maybe nearly as dangerous as the worldview of nothing's going on and let's go back to the way things were, because even though my childhood sucked, it's better than it might be if I lose my stability and footing in where I am now. And, that's this whole thing, this without sinking too far into politics, this concept of, make America great is basically the person who goes into their therapist and says, I want to be happy like I was as a kid, only to find out that as a kid, they had an abusive parent, an alcoholic parent, a sibling that beat them up, teachers that laughed at them because they were different, and yet somehow we romanticize it and we make it into the world that we want to live in now, and we don't. Freud called this infantile regression. When the going gets tough, the untough go back to a former state that they make into something better. Everybody does it. I do it. You do it. We all do it.
Okay, let's talk about the astrology and healing topic. So just astrology and healing in general. What
Well,
would you like to say about that?
um, what I'd like, people often say, so, is astrology spiritual? Do you have to believe in God? For a while, it was like, if you believe in astrology, does that mean you don't believe in God? And now that question really has become, so if you believe in astrology, do you have to believe in God for it to work? Because, and the answer is no, astrology is a body of information. And although it's alien to me to think that one could be an astrologer and not have a cosmological sense of the magic and order and beauty of it all. And although I just had this conversation with someone very, very recently, and I was very surprised that this person identified himself as an atheist, and I immediately defined myself as a theist. I said, although I would call myself a polytheist, meaning that I believe that there is a singularity. You could call it God. I don't, but you could. You could call it energy. You could call it intelligence. You could call it the unified quantum field. I don't care what you call it, but there's something that is in everything. Okay, so that's an ancient belief. But I also believe that something that is in everything manifests in its godliness or in its divine proportion that's larger than all the egos running around, which is how we ascribe archetypes or powers to things like lightning or mountains or a city, or things take on these larger meanings. And it was William Blake who said that the ancients saw these geniuses, these larger symbolic meanings of things, and they described them in their poems and in their mythologies. And then the priesthood came along and turned them into religion, and therefore owned them and took the power away from them and put it in the structure of religion. Now what does this have to do with your question? Everything. Because healing, or let me put it this way, astrology in itself is neither spiritual nor healing. It's a body of information. It can very logically and without much resistance be used as a clarification on our spiritual or metaphysical path. And metaphysical simply means that which is beyond physical, that which comes alongside physical. So spirit and soul are both metaphysical quantities or qualities, I guess. So astrology is not by itself metaphysical. You can be an astrologer and only use it for stock market, analysis. And I know people who do and do it very successfully. It's not necessarily, they can be metaphysical, but the astrology is not necessarily metaphysical. Also, if a doctor is using astrology to help with symptom analysis, that can be very physical. If an astrologer is using astrology as a predictive tool for events, that's not metaphysical or spiritual. And now, by the same token, astrology can be used for and integrated into almost any healing modality. But as soon as we do that, we now get to the question of what is healing. Now, there's a very well-known psychologist. Many people call this person the torchbearer of Jungian psychology, James Hillman, who passed away a number of years ago. James Hillman, who wrote a book called 100 Years of Psychoanalysis and No One's Getting Better. James Hillman, who wrote a magnificent book called The Soul's Code, and he wrote my favorite Pluto book called The Dream in the Underworld, which is not about astrology, but Hillman was an astrologer, even like Jung, even though they didn't tout their astrology, just like Thomas More, the author of Soulmates and Care of the Soul and the Reenchantment of Soul in Everyday Life. Thomas More actually lectured at an astrology conference I went to a number of years ago and told the story of how in care. No, it was in The Reenchantment of Soul in Everyday Life that his publisher said, "We love your book, but you need to take out chapter 8 or rewrite it because it's on astrology. The title is Mars." And he said, "Well, I can't take it out because it's the purpose of the whole book." And they said, "Well, someone as famous as you can't be associated with astrology." And he said, "Well, that's the book." And they left it in, much to his credit. But I was going to say something about Hillman, and I totally lost my train here. That happens really rarely when I really am going down a track. Hillman, okay. So I had the privilege of hearing James Hillman give a keynote talk at an astrology conference maybe 20 years ago. And the title of his talk was as strange and wonderful and as powerful as the talk itself. And the title of his talk was a quote from Paracelsus, who was a pre-Renaissance, a medieval physician who actually used homeopathic techniques few centuries before Samuel Hahnemann created the word homeopathy and codified it. But Paracelsus was a healer, physician, and used astrology and used many tools. The title of Hillman's talk was this: "Heaven retains half of all maladies." I'm going to say it again. The title of his talk was a direct quote from Paracelsus, and it was, "Heaven retains half of all maladies." What the hell does that mean? It means that we get sick, ill, diseased in a larger environment that is invisible, that astrology can help us see. That whether we call it our genetics, whether we call it our morphogenetic field, to quote Rupert Sheldrake, whether we call it our biology of belief and the origin of the feelings, our worldview and whatever, all these things create something, but you can fix the symptom, but you're not going to fix the underlying causes, because heaven retains half of all maladies. It's a brilliant concept. So, as a healer, there's a big difference between a healer and a fixer. Michael Cohen was not a healer, he was a fixer. That was his job. He took a symptom for Donald Trump and he fixed it. That was, and physicians are largely, and I'm not saying there aren't physicians who aren't, there are physicians who are brilliant healers, unquestionably. But physicians are trained not to be healers, they're trained to be fixers. And the reason is that I don't know that it's as easy to train healers as it is fixers, because with a fixer, you have a symptom and you do this and that. It's a mechanical, it's like going to plumbing school or to electrical school. You know, here's the symptom and here's what you do. If that doesn't work, then you do this. If that doesn't work, then you do that. Now, I'm not saying that there's no room for intuition and human interaction, but that's basically the orientation. Now, with healing, it touches on something else, and it's something that maybe we can pick up next week, because I think we're bumping into time right now. But it really has to do with what is healing, and can anyone heal anyone else? And I don't think the answer is quite as simple as some people who say, no, no one can heal anyone else. Healing happens from within. A healer simply can create an environment where healing can occur. That may be true. And then there are other people who are saying, well, of course a healer can heal. That's his job. I think of the concept or the definition in Sanskrit of a guru. And we think of a guru as a teacher. But the actual meaning of guru is someone who can awaken the power of liberation, awakening. You can substitute the word healing in a person through the guru's power not the person's power. In other words, there's something that as a guru that I would do, and I'm not putting myself in the guru position, but there's something that a guru would do that would go, wham, wake up. And the person goes, holy shit, I don't know what just happened, but something's different, something's changed. And then that person goes down a path that then they have to do the healing work. So it's tricky as to where healing occurs or who initiates healing. But coming back to homeopathy, just on a full swing, since that's where we started, one of the basic concepts of homeopathy is that healing doesn't occur by giving a drug or a medicine that creates an effect. Healing occurs by giving a remedy that stimulates the body to heal itself, because nature can heal. In fact, only nature can heal.
So how do we bring that to astrology? And just real quick, if you can answer that question, like how does the healing discussion correlate with what we're doing as astrologers or in study of astrology?
The answer is yes. Very short answer. I think it's a mistake for the astrologer to think that he, she, or they can simply just say something and that'll fix it. And this gets into something else that I want to start off next week, if we can, talking about, and that is this notion that everyone heals in the same way and at the same speed, and that if I look at someone's chart and go, well, all you need to do is this, take this remedy, wear this gemstone, say this 14 times a day, and do 2 months of therapy with this person because they're really brilliant, and see this somatic therapist for a week and you'll be fine. And the person does all that, and at the end of that, and they still feel like shit. So what I've done is I've set that person up for feeling worse than they did even at the beginning, because now they feel hopeless, like they took the cure and it didn't work. And so I think that the question isn't how can astrology be used in healing, although I think that's the underlying question. I think the surface question is, how can we be careful not to use astrology in a manner that sets people up for failure? Because that's the opposite of healing. How do we use astrology homeopathically so that we can look at the chart and give potential remedies that can help a person alter their worldview without bringing them into conflict or just telling them, well, this is what you're doing and this is what you should do? That's suppressive. That's allopathic. So it's not a simple answer, but it's not a simple question.
Well, it brings us back to the overarching conversation around homeopathy and a homeopathic approach to astrology, which, like you just said, is about giving potential remedies, not saying do this, this, and this, and that's going to fix you. It's do these potential, these things have a potential remedy for you that will help you to express that part of you more fully. It's not about fixing anything, really.
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, most postmodern psychologists know that there's a whole branch of psychology called liberation psychology, which is basically the fallacy of Western psychologists going into some third world country and thinking that they can, or not just psychologists, but by giving them education, running water, and banking system, that they can fix everything. Things don't fix from the outside in. Things heal from the inside out. And so the question becomes, and again, a homeopathic physician will work at two layers, because there's the surface layer, because all healing occurs from the surface downward. And until the surface things are cured, you can't get to the next layer, the next layer, the next layer. But while you're working from the top down, you're also working from the core up. And so in effect, astrology does not have answers. And anyone who's worked with me, they know when someone calls up and says, hey, I got a question I need answered. I need to know whether I should jump into this relationship or sell the house or take this job. I go, no, I think you got the wrong person. I think you're looking for the answer astrologer. I'm the question astrologer. I don't do answers. I will never answer a question for a client because it's a disservice, because that is a medical, top-down, authoritative, allopathic, here's my answer for your question, even if I have good answers. Matter of fact, especially dangerous if I have good answers, because if I have a good answer, you're more likely to take it as your own, but it's not your own. It's my good answer. And it stops you from your path where the answer comes from the inside out that empowers you, rather than taking the answer from the government, the church, the whatever it is on the outside in.
And creating an eternal, perpetual dependence on that external for answers.
Perpetual dependence.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Love it, Rick. Thank you so much. So, I mean, my summary today is, it's very similar to what we talked about last week in terms of expression versus suppression. How can we? Heaven retains half of all maladies.
Paracelsus.
Yes, which is an amazing concept to really bring into the...
Who was a Jupiterian. I don't know his birth data, but his full name was something like Paracelsus von Bombasto. It was like this Jupiterian name that was inflated. But he had some really amazing ideas for the, I think, 13th century, I think.
And also looking at the different things in our chart that we may interpret as bad, or things to avoid, or things to protect ourselves against, or things to, I love the visual of your head turning towards the thing we like, then everything else is in that blind spot. But paying attention to the things that we may not be paying attention to, and using the chart as a great map for that, of being able to point those things out, because they aren't always obvious to us.
Right. So, remember, oppositions, although they tend to be, I look here and then I project there, oppositions are really aspects that are about increasing our awareness, so we have more peripheral vision, so we can see both sides of the tug of war simultaneously. That's what it's about.
Very good. And also this idea around the world, our worldview, and recognizing that the way that we're seeing things are based on our worldview, and that there's lots of worldviews and lots of different perspectives, and taking the opportunity to expand the worldview as much as possible.
And our chart is part of our worldview.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Rick, thank you so much. For anyone who wants to get Rick's daily updates, you can go to Rick Levine Astrologer, right? Astrologer.
On Instagram.
On Instagram.
Or Facebook.
And for any of you interested in going deeper with Rick and learning the foundations of astrology from Rick, you can sign up to get on our wait list for his upcoming Foundations of Astrology course. And that's at astrologyhub.com/foundation.
And I should say that will be useful both for very beginners, intermediates, and even people who have been doing astrology. It'll be an overview, a short 10-hour overview that is a revisitation to the fundamentals.
Fantastic. Can't wait for that. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll look forward to next week. Sounds like we're going to be talking about how we can be careful not to set up astrology clients for failure.
Let's put that positively. And
yes, exactly.
How we can be positive to set clients up for success.
There you go. Much, much better. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you all.